Hello folks, and welcome back to Philosophery. Today I am interviewing a professor at the University of Galway on this beautiful campus. Since I attended the fuel protests a few weeks ago, I've been kind of troubled by the idea of nationalism. And what is it? And what does our flag represent? The flag has been used in what I see as deviant ways, in ways that don't represent the original meaning of our flag. And perhaps it's also been surrendered to that use by most of society, in that now people perceive the flag as meaning hardcore right-wing nationalists. That's not really what our flag represents, or what it was brought into existence to represent. So to discuss this, I am very, very lucky to be talking to Professor Siniša Malešević. He's considered a major figure in the study of nationalism. He's authored several books, including The Sociology of War and Violence, Nation States and Nationalisms, Grounded Nationalisms, Why Humans Fight, and the Rise of Organized Brutality. Malešević is considered a major figure in the modern study of nationalism because he argues that nationalism is not simply an ancient tribal instinct, but something continuously reproduced through education systems, media, bureaucracy, rituals, and political organization. His work bridges sociology, political theory, history, and philosophy, and is particularly known for explaining why nationalism remains so powerful in the supposedly globalized world. So here we go. Let's talk to Siniša. Okay, Siniša, thank you so much for joining us here on Philosophery. It's great to have somebody of your caliber to talk about nationalism.
Thanks for inviting me.
It's okay, our first question. What is nationalism?
Yeah. That's a big one.
This could be our last question too.
Sure, yes. I mean, there is no single, obviously, definition. Even with academia, people differ. Some emphasize political aspects, some cultural, some economic. But I see nationalism, first and foremost, as an ideology and also practice, social practice that emphasizes centrality of nationhood, belonging to nationhood, identifying with the nationhood, understanding nationhood as a dominant form of collective solidarity, also as a dominant form of political legitimacy in a modern world.
Okay.
It will be a very simple definition.
Political legitimacy. How?
Yeah, so that's linked very much with the character of state in where we live. So nationalism really doesn't exist in the pre-modern world. So you need to kind of, if you look at the way how states have developed over the course of human history, we've lived most of the time as hunter-gatherers for 98% of our existence, so there was no state. Then when states emerge, you have city-states, you have patrimonial kingdoms, and most of the time for about 5,000 years we have empires. So empires are very different in the sense that, nation cannot exist because what matters is really your status, social status, whether you're born aristocrat or a kind of peasant, a commoner. So the whole identification is based either around the religion, around the kind of dynastic lines, or it's very localized. So if you're a commoner, so what matters to you is kinship, clan, or religion, or village, so you don't really have that sense of people identifying large groups apart from religion. Religion is the only one. But even within the religion, you have a divide between the elite and the rest. Yeah. So it's really in the kind of only after the French and American revolutions and the Latin American wars of independence that you have that idea, which obviously goes all the way back to Enlightenment and Romanticism, that power should belong to people. So the whole idea of popular sovereignty is where the political legitimacy comes from. So in a sense, there is a shift, dramatic shift in the way how states legitimize their existence. So pre-modern state built their existence around the idea that king has the right to rule because of the divine origins. It is, some link with the Saint Peter in a Christian tradition or kind of with Muhammad in Islamic tradition or other tradition. So it's really in modernity only that you have that idea that people should have a sovereignty. So that's why nation states are crucial. And in that sense, nationalism is the kind of backbone of any nation state.
And it sounds like you're saying that there's an egalitarianism to nationhood, at least in its in the concept.
Yeah. No, it is. That's a good point, because originally that was the whole idea.
Yeah.
Égalité, fraternité, liberté. So all of these are about equality, liberty to choose, to elect, to be represented. Fraternity, that's the solidarity, the core of it, and equality. And equality was that everybody had to be represented. I mean, that was the whole idea of the third estate in the French, after the French Revolution. But obviously that it didn't turn out like that.
Not quite, no.
So the focus was more like what has been achieved after the French Revolution, American Revolution, really was the idea that there is a kind of equality in terms of moral worth of human beings. You as a philosopher, I'm sure you deal with these questions. So that was recognized. Before, if you were born peasant, you were really an inferior species for aristocrats. They didn't care. I mean, they could shoot you at will and things like that. So after the French Revolution, we have that understanding that human beings are equal in terms of moral worth, not in terms of, access to resources or anything else. So that's why French Revolution, American revolutions were ultimately middle-class revolutions. They gave power to middle classes. They recognized some things for other groups, but they were not egalitarian in a sense that everybody got what they were hoping for. So, not to mention Haiti and all the kind of colonial positions, because the Haitian revolution was just a few years later after the French Revolution, and they were not recognized. They were, the whole idea of universal human rights didn't apply outside of the France.
Outside of France.
France, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
In an Irish context, is there anything specific about Irish nationalism?
I think what's specific about Irish nationalism is that a lot of it has a strong leftist kind of heritage, which is unusual. Let's say in continental Europe, when you say nationalism, people always think right-wing, far-right, fascism, blah, blah. But nationalism is not like that. Nationalism is, as we just discussed, in the context of the French Revolution, is very much a liberal project initially. It is also, to some extent, it was advocating rights of women, not very extensively, very rudimentary. But still, it was something that it started. And then over the years, nationalism shifted more towards the right. So you see that by the end of the 19th century, it's a very right-wing ideology linked with eugenics, linked with kind of racism, and the pinnacle of that is Nazism and fascism before that, and Japanese version of fascism and elsewhere. And then in the kind of after the Second World War, 50s, 60s, decolonial movements, nationalism shifts to the left. So a lot of nationalism, kind of in Africa and Asia at that time, is kind of very leftist, anti-imperial project. And I think Irish nationalism, particularly of the Sinn Féin variety, has that, at least, there is that heritage, that nationalism is about something that is against imperial projects. And that originally nationalism was like that. We want a nation state, we don't want to live under imperial rule. But obviously it could go in so many different directions, and I think Irish nationalism, has maintained strongly, even I think within the, kind of mainstream, let's say Fianna Fáil, there was that element there. But on the other hand, there was the right-wing link with the church, which was never really reconciled. And then you have also Fine Gael version of Irish nationalism, which is very right-wing version, not far-right, but right-wing version, law and order, the state and church, and, maybe not as strongly as it used to be, but I think that the Sinn Féin, and particularly the northern, version of nationalism, it has been associated with kind of left-wing version, as it is like with Plaid Cymru in Wales. It is a left-wing version of nationalism. Scottish National Party left-wing. So that's unusual to some extent, I think, in a European context. But obviously Irish nationalism has a longer history, and
I hear where this came from, where this discussion, where I wanted to talk to you was I went down to the fuel protests a few weeks ago, and I talked to a lot of people there, and on the first day I was there was only a couple of Irish flags, and most people were talking about the fuel and the fuel protest. On the second day I went down, there was a few more Irish flags, and there was a kind of slightly different set of characters on the fringe. On the third day, there was a load of Irish flags. And I was doing a live broadcast and people were asking me, why are there so many flags there? And then I heard this kind of, I don't want to say this was the main cause or the main argument that people were making there, but this was just a fringe argument that I heard a few people making, was Ireland first. Ireland for the Irish.
Okay.
This to me goes against the original meaning of the Irish flag. As you said there, the Irish nationhood, Irish nationality, it rose up against that kind of thinking, that kind of imperial colonialist thinking where one is better than the other. And it was about, no, not Irish are not better, we're equal.
Yes.
What do you think when you see the flag and nationalism, particularly in Ireland, been used in that almost imperial fashion?
Yes. So this is a very recent development. I mean, you can say that there are some historical parallels with the blue shirts, which was also kind of quasi-fascist movement, but it wasn't necessarily shaped around these ideas that we have now. I think this is a global. I mean, nationalism has become, it was always global to some extent, but now with social media, it's become very globalized. So a lot of these ideas and discourses come from abroad, from Britain, from US. The Irish first has never been part of Irish nationalism. It was almost, as you say, the exact opposite of that. So this is a rhetoric of British first and American first, and it's kind of elements of that are here. So there are elements of far-right movement, and I haven't studied that, but people who are studying, they make these very clear connection. Some funding is coming from abroad, so this is not necessarily original Irish movement. I'm sure there are grievances that you can tap into, and people can be mobilized along this, but it's not something that originated here. I think much of it comes from abroad, but obviously, if you have economic inequalities, if you have profound issues like fuel, you can mobilize people, unfortunately, around these kind of very right-wing ideas. And flag, it is an interesting thing. The Irish flag was meant to represent unity of two different traditions in the orange and the green, and now it's used against mostly immigrants, essentially, in a sense. But it's not very articulated. I don't see it. It probably will be, because this is what has happened throughout Europe, and particularly you have everywhere far-right movements. Ireland has been unusual in that respect. It didn't have a far-right movement, in part because the electoral system here is not kind of easy to get into, but I'm sure it will happen, initially. And I can see a lot of these small fringe far-right parties are now uniting, so they might end up in having some seats. Although I don't think the majority of Irish people would support that kind of a very, kind of Nigel Farage. This is very much Nigel Farage version. And Irish nationalism is completely the opposite of that. Yeah. So I see they gaining some importance and support, but in the long term, something would have to happen for Irish nationalism completely to reorganize itself, and that doesn't seem to be the case.
To reorganize itself back into its original kind of...
Yeah. I think that the problem here is like where the Sinn Féin stands on this, because Sinn Féin sees itself as a left-wing party, and it is kind of the main left-wing party of that kind of nationalism. But it's, kind of to some extent also opportunistic. It doesn't want to be very loud on these issues. It wants to keep people on board, especially when the elections come. So it would be interesting to see what happens with Sinn Féin in that sense, whether Sinn Féin might move a bit to the right. I couldn't see Sinn Féin as a far-right movement, no. It cannot do that, but it can move a little bit more, become a Fianna Fáil light and accept some of this stuff.
Yeah. You mentioned social media there, and I've looked at some of your work, and it came to mind that Nietzsche once said that language is a net that communicates people for organizing. You know what I mean? And it's for us to organize ourselves into our goals. And I've often thought that may have been true at Nietzsche's time, that it was a net. But that net has now thickened, so it became a blanket, and I'd argue that now it's more like a quilt, that it's both comforting and suffocating at the same time. And the thickness of our information networks now mean that it's very hard to to see past them. Whereas you could see through a net, you could see the reality, okay, it's just an ideas we have. Now we have this thickening of these concepts. So, but there's also a shallowness to the social media, to the social media style of communicating, and that it's mostly slogans and memes and pictures. What effect do you think social media has had on people's idea of nationalism, on people's ability to think deeply about nationalism, what it means? Because most people in Ireland now, if you say nationalist, they think far right.
Yes.
If you wave a flag, they think far right. And I feel like social media has played a large role in that.
Yes. No, you're completely right in that sense. I mean, it's interesting. I was recently writing some small piece on digital era, and I was reading some stuff written 20 years ago in the kind of beginning of it. It was everybody was so optimistic, the democratic means of communication, it'd be wonderful access to information, and the opposite has happened in a way. It's just like it become this giant machine that destroys any discussion, any arguments, and it is about slogans. It is about shouting at each other, and essentially in bubbles and everything else. Yeah, in that environment, obviously the loudest gets the attention, and obviously the fact that all these social media are owned by people who, like Elon Musk and others, who benefit from that, who want this, who are supporting far-right policies. It's not unusual that there are no constraints. You could see how social media. I used to rely very much on social media, especially Twitter. Academics would use, what's going on in terms of conferences, publications, stuff like that, and then suddenly, just nobody's using it anymore because it's useless in that sense. It's so it's kind of very difficult to see what we can do. We cannot avoid it. I mean, obviously, this is people have grown up on this. My sons, who are adults now, they don't know anything other than this is the way you get information. With AI, that's even worse now in that sense. So, I mean, it's hard to say. When you mention Nietzsche, that's good because he himself has been monopolized by right wing. Even he was very openly against nationalism, very clearly. So it's like, so that's another thing that has been happening. With a lot of ideas being reconfigured and used for very different purposes, and that's what you say now. For me, it's unusual because like 20 years ago. When you would say nationalism here, people wouldn't think about right-wing at all. So that has changed. A new generation are influenced by global trends, and these are global trends. So Irish nationalism needs to be reformulated more along the lines of civic nationalism, as it originally was. I mean, it's just like not because this is a different version of sectarianism. It's like you don't want that. I mean, and that's not good for any society. And if you ethnicize, then I see now with the Galway West elections, how far right are using these images, ethnocide. I mean, it's just so awful to see ethnocide, which is essentially genocide. It is about the argument of the great replacement. Yeah, but using this in the world where the actual genocide are taking place, like in Palestine, and using this as a metaphor, it's so distasteful. I mean, to put it mildly. Yeah,
it is. It's terrible. It's hard. I was talking to an older lady up in the very country part of the top of Mayo yesterday, and I mentioned I'd be doing this interview, and I mentioned nationalism. She said, I don't like the nationalists now. She said, I don't like it. She said, I love my Irish flag. She said, I used to hang it out, but now I can't hang it out.
Yes, that's
to me, we're that troubles me because not only is it changing what the flag means now today, but it's been surrendered. By the people who used it in its original intent. We're proud to be Irish. That doesn't mean we're better than others.
No.
I'm trying to ask, is there a way to come back to using the flag? Should we surrender it and say that belongs to the nationalists, or can we use it ourselves?
No. I mean, I think that's an important debate which has taken place in other countries. In a way, what do you do when far right takes over? And some people have given up, and especially from the left, we're trying to say, okay, we have to get rid of nationalism. We cannot get rid of nationalism. That's the thing. Nationalism is the backbone of legitimacy, political legitimacy in the modern world.
Yeah.
What you can do, you can take the narrative, you can reframe nationalism, you can make it more civic, you can make it more inclusive, you can make it more about equality, justice, fraternity that it was, not about, hate. And that's the problem. It's like, all of these national symbols emerged around the same time. It's like all the flags you have as standardized flags around 19th century, early 19th century, and they were exactly representing that, popular sovereignty. Sovereignty belongs to people, not to ethnic group. It belongs to people who are citizens of a particular society who are involved. There's a public sphere. We are part of that. It's not about, counting, origins and stuff like that. Because if you start that, nobody belongs anywhere. I mean, it's all arbitrary where you draw the line. I mean, this is so funny to look in the context of U.S. or Australia. I mean, these immigrant society, everybody's an immigrant. So what do you do? I mean, where do you draw the line? Who, how many generations? I mean, it's like in that sense. I mean, all of the European societies have been mixing as well. So it's not. This is just so. I mean, it is important. So that's the thing. I have been advocating that for a while. You cannot get rid of nationalism. You have to reorganize all this debate and kind of take over the flag, take over the symbols, associate them with different things. Don't surrender it, because otherwise there's no way that you can escape that. I mean, that's the thing.
that seems to be a main part of your work, is that nationalism is not something that can be surpassed, really.
Yes.
Or transcended. It's here. It's how we view the world.
Yes, I mean, as long as we live in nation states, and we haven't been living in nation state for very long. It's very. We have to look at, even the French-American Revolution, people that were involved in these movements, they didn't know what they're creating. They only knew what they don't want to have any longer, and these aristocratic feudal orders. So it really took a long time for the whole idea of nationhood to emerge and develop. Because if you look at, after the American Revolution, majority of people, so they were middle class, they identified as British. They were part of the British Empire. They dressed up, they spoke as British. And their main cause for setting up this independent state was economic, rather than anything else. And then it became eventually political and cultural when symbols emerged and everything else. So you can say that nationalism only starts in the 19th century properly, to spread, and it was still then very middle class. Most people were illiterate and living in villages, so you couldn't see the world. Nationhood is an abstract concept. You need to conceptualize the world very differently. So for that, you need education system. You need standardized languages. You need standardized French, standardized German, standardized Irish. If you look, in Connemara and in Donegal, people don't speak standardized Irish. The one that is taught in school is quite different because that's the way how languages will become. You pick one say this is the standard. Everybody has to learn that one. Before modernity, there were so many dialects. So in this dialect, we speak language that is comprehensible to next village, but 15 villages down the road, not the same, very different. So you needed to end up the standard language, and that's the nature of cultural nationalism in a sense that you have that. So in that sense, it's quite modern, very modern phenomenon, and then after the Second World, it becomes a global phenomenon where everybody has to, set up a nation state. Empires collapse, but nobody wants to identify themselves with the imperial project. So imperialism remains as informal, but formally you wouldn't say, "Oh, I really want to build an empire," which people used to do that easily. In the 19th century, even early 20th century. Empire was seen as something positive. I mean, not necessarily for everybody, but that was the kind of the discourse. And now we live in the world of nation states, and they legitimize themselves through some form of nationalism. So that's the thing. You cannot avoid it. As long as you have nation states, you will have nationalism.
Yeah, you mentioned language, how there used to be differences in language, even like Connemara and Donegal people. And I wonder, I was talking to somebody the last day, and they told me multiculturalism has failed. Nationalism is the way to go. And sure, nationalism is much older than multiculturalism. It's been here before. And I thought, I'm wondering, did nationalism actually take over from multiculturalism in a way? Because it kind of, as you said, it unified the languages, which would have made different cultures, even in Ireland. So you would have had a multicultural Ireland amongst the different towns and villages, and as you say, every few miles things have changed. And then nationalism came along, and it kind of united everybody. So what do you think of that argument that nationalism is something natural that's always
but
been here?
that just tells you how successful this ideology is, because people think something that is completely wrong historically. It's very easy to show that. Cultural diversity is much of the historical norm. Homogeneity is something that comes very late. And it comes with coercion, with the state imposing this. So if you look at particularly the French Revolution, because French Revolution is really the model around which, and French state is the model around which nationalism is built and imitated throughout the world. So, I mean, all nationalisms kind of invoke that kind of mythology we've been here from time immemorial, which is complete nonsense. That's very easy to show. So, I mean, if you look at the world that we lived in before nation states, so these are the imperial world. So that's at least 5,000 of years, we've lived in a world which was dominated by empires. And empires are culturally heterogeneous completely, because they have no borders, they have frontiers. They keep expanding, collecting different groups, integrating into imperial project. If you look at the Chinese Empire, if you look at the Roman Empire, doesn't matter really, who are the people. You can collect anybody for any description of any religious background. Roman Empire was really interesting in that sense because it had this, pantheon of gods. So you bring your own god into our pantheon and you're fine as long as you're a loyal subject to the empire. Christians were a problem because they said there is only one our God, if you don't recognize other gods. So that was a problem until Roman Empire embraced Christianity. So all empires are culturally heterogeneous. They don't care about cultural homogeneity because that's not the way how empires are organized. They're organized around very different, social status. Your lineage matters, whether you're born with the blue blood or not, aristocrat, dynasty. I mean, even today, if you look at the royal families, they're all intermarried. I mean, King Charles and Danish Queen and whoever, because that's the medieval way of how societies are organized. So the fact that you have different religious groups or people speaking languages which are very different, Slavic or Celtic or whatever, didn't matter at all. So it's only with nation states that you have that project will homogenize. We will all be like one. Even though for thousands of years we were very diverse, and you're very good, that's a very good point, which people don't realize in Ireland because, as anywhere else, there is always that emphasis, we've always been living here, blah, blah, blah. We're all Celts and whatever. I mean, these are mythologies. All nationalisms have built around some myths of origins. You have these myths of origins which are not true, but they work. They give you that sense of we've been here from time immemorial. So yes, I mean, you had enormous cultural differences in this island, for thousands of years. People had no interaction with each other. I mean, we have myths in, the Setanta and stuff like that, but they're not real. And that's the same everywhere else. So people don't understand that the fact that you went through an educational system which keeps telling you you're Irish, you're French, you're German, you're Ghanaian, and then suddenly think, this is how I feel. This is like because somebody told you that, for generations. And it's, it's not that this is something that has been there. It's very recent. I mean, nationalism is very recent. Nation states are very modern in that way.
Yeah.
And you can see even in Irish context how British state was quite effective in imposing its own language on this society. So it shows you very clearly. I mean, it's.
No, absolutely. Yeah, like I often hear the argument that we're losing our culture, that our culture's been diluted, etc., etc. And I think if you're really worried about that, maybe you should be protesting at Google and YouTube and the social media giants, because they've damaged and homogenized culture across the Western world more so than any kind of immigration has. You mentioned in your work, and I think this goes against what most people think as well, that nationalism is an elitist project. And most people think it comes from the ground up, but you're like, no, this comes from the top down.
But I mean, in Irish context, that's so easy to show. I mean, who are the people who start the GAA? Who are the people who start kind of the Celtic revival? I mean, they're all elites. They're cultural elites. They learn, they standardize their language and then say, we need to introduce this language. So it's so easy to show this. It doesn't come from people. I mean, one of the kind of main classics of theories of nationalism, Ernst Gellner, he was really good in that sense. He would emphasize very clearly how, he uses these terms sort of in a sardonic way. A megalomania is an empire versus Ruritania. And Ruritania is a state that seeks independence, in fighting megalomania. So what you do, in a way, this whole process of standardizing culture, you actually kill these cultural differences because, they are so, as we talked about, Connemara and Tony Gall. I mean, I have a colleague who actually works here. He's a professor who's a fluent Irish speaker, but he learned it in school. So he goes to Connemara, talks to people in Irish, and they respond to him in English because he's the outsider. He's not part of their local culture. I mean, it shows you, and that's still a local culture. And national culture imposes and kills local culture and tells you there is only one way of being Irish, there's only one way of being French. And, so in a sense, it is about kind of destroying cultural difference in the name of something abstract. And if you look to the far-right people, I mean, most of them don't speak any Irish, so it's not, I mean, they use this term Irish culture in a performative way, not in a substantive way. Have they read Ulysses? I mean, ask them something. They don't know anything about Irish culture. What is Irish culture? They speak English? I mean, there were, cases of people being beaten up for not speaking English in this country. Not speaking Irish is not a problem, but not speaking English, I mean, this is so absurd.
That is true. that is, yeah. Speak our language, kind of. Yeah. No, that is true.
Yes, and when you said the elite aspect of it is important because, if you look at the Irish culture, I mean, this is a high Irish culture is Joyce and Yeats and all of that. These are elite representatives who were part of the circles. These were European circles who kind of were involved in setting up these nationalist networks. So it's all very much top down. It's all about kind of reviving something that is not really reviving but creating, using some elements. This is particularly strong in Germany and Eastern Europe. When they were kind of trying to create dictionaries by picking from local words and, standardizing. But it's all still top down. It's just the way that you borrow from different elements. I mean, so it's,
you mentioned the GAA there, and I've heard somewhere that Irish people historically identified more with their local areas than with any nationality, and a lot of that, and maybe still do, and a lot of that maybe has to do with the GAA.
Yes.
And sometimes when I see the Irish flags coming up at like the fuel protest, I'm like, that's kind of like bringing an Irish flag to a club GAA match. It almost, it's like, of course, like what's it doing here? You know what I mean? What role did the GAA play in this, and what role does it still play?
Yeah, no, I think GAA is I've written a little bit in some of my books because I think it's a wonderful example. So you have these movements. GAA is a part also of a pan-European kind of sports movements. That you have so-called societies in what used to be, I mean, Central Eastern Europe. They were all kind of very, very sport-oriented. Kind of build a new nation, young people, socialize them, healthy. Men, later healthy women. So it was that kind of 19th century project that you needed to rejuvenate nation, create nation through sports, through culture, through many different things. So these so-called societies were very effective, and GA is quite similar to them in a way, but it is unique because it focused on specific sports that are distinct in Ireland. And again, they had to be recreated and standardized and established as this is the there are not different ways that you can play hurling. This is the way. We have the particular way, and that's the standardized way. And that obviously, if you go back to in history, wouldn't be the way because there were elements of hurling or something that resembles hurling has existed a long time, but it wasn't standardized. So once we have a GA, we know exactly what hurling is, what football is, what rounders, whatever it is. So it is a way of kind of nation building. It's an important mechanism of nation building. The fact that it was associated with parishes was also important with Catholic Church, and all of that. And that local identity has become really strong and still is. It's fascinating. And I think Ireland is to some extent unique in that respect. It has these sports which, I mean, you have that like Basque Country have their own sports in a way which have developed more in resistance to Spanish hegemony, if you like. Okay. But in Ireland, I think GA has been very successful in terms of kind of penetrating everyday life and people identifying with it and becoming, everybody wants to be in all Ireland. I mean, even though it's a small country, it has become really good in that. I think GA is probably the most effective such an organization in Europe, in kind of penetrating everything and being linked and creating this local kind of county identity, which is, you're right, it's still very strong. I mean, it's not. I don't know. I cannot think of any other country where you have that on that level.
Of an amateur sport, I don't think there is one.
Yes.
I don't think there is one. Maybe college football in the US.
Yes. But it's based on, it's differently organized. I mean, it's not the whole identity. I mean, maybe town. If you have nothing else, you'll support college. But here it's strong really for the whole county. I mean, it's.
I always think hurling started when a clever woman threw a ball in to fight a bunch of fighting lads with sticks. So the first one to get it in the door there wins. That'll sort it out. But I listened to Charles Taylor, and he has some overlaps with your ideas, kind of as a what he calls a social imaginary. I think it becomes a background where a background narrative, a background story of who we are, and in that we orient ourselves in the world. We orient ourselves morally, ideologically. We can almost reach in and take out things that matter to us. Taylor talks about individualism, and he talks about how important individualism has been in getting individual rights and getting private property and the pursuit of happiness, all these different things. But then he says we've moved into what he calls a deviant individualism. And that is where it becomes more kind of narcissistic, where it's more myopic, where we're just thinking about ourselves, and we suddenly believe the story that we're complete individuals and that we become all about ourselves and we don't see outside ourselves. Is what's happening now, could it be called a deviant nationalism in the same sense, where you have nationalism that's good for organizing, that gives us rights, that helps us organize societies, that helps us view and categorize almost the world? But what's happening now seems to be a deviant version of that. Now, I know you've made the distinction between a nationalism that bites and a nationalism that barks. And I'm wondering, does one of them kind of marry up with the deviant?
Yeah. I think the deviant nationalism is more of a barking type. It is about being, shouting, displaying flags, but there is no substance to it. I mean, it's interesting if you look at the local elections in Britain, and it was interesting. They were interviewing people who voted for the reform, Farage. Can you name 3 policies? They don't. I mean, 90% of them had no idea what they were voting for. They only know that, it's about flag and anti-immigrant, that's all they know. I mean, it's like, so I mean, that's like with Trumpism, you have people who don't really think through what they're arguing, what they're supporting. They just know what they don't want. And obviously it is about scapegoating and finding somebody. And ultimately it is linked with individualism in a way, because you are unhappy, you feel rootless, you don't know what you can do, what you can change. I mean, there are enormous inequalities. We really live in a world that is profoundly unequal. It hasn't been so unequal for such a long time. I mean, it's like people are looking to blame somebody. So you need to blame somebody, and it's easy to blame migrants and women and whoever who is nearby, rather than the system that generates that. So you end up with people who are really in charge of this very degenerate system that we live in, and then you vote for even more of that rather than less. So you end up obviously with less, equality. In the US is particularly worse. I mean, people have to work 3 jobs to survive. I mean, a lot of people, and so it's just. And then you vote for Trump, which it's always that kind of bizarre thing. The people who are most affected by these people and these companies, they vote for them. So yes, I mean, it shows you there are problems in the way how nationalism is articulated. I mean, that's not the only form. You do have a left-wing nationalist movements, Podemos, and it's like Syriza in Greece, were also nationalist movement, very strongly nationalist, but coming from the left, and you have that elsewhere, where nationalism tries to articulate their message in a different way. It is about, achieving more equality. It is about, reorganizing this whole system. It is about, containing this excesses of capitalism if you cannot do more than that. And that message is not, it doesn't come through in a same way. Although you can say that in politics, it is a pendulum, so it can go the other way. I mean, once you reach the ultimate, if Britain ends up with reform, this will be complete car crash. And then you can rebuild. I mean, that seems to be, what's happening in the US. I mean, for another 2 years of this kind of government, I mean, what's this going to produce?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is I hear the phrase, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's become pretty popular. And I see America as holding a fairly unique place, and I could be wrong on this, a fairly unique place in the world, in that they're maybe the stitching that keeps the international order together. They're the gun in Europe's holster since World War II. That should maybe never have been taken out, but it's still there. But what I see happening now with Trump, it's not that he's thrown out the baby with the bathwater, it's that he's thrown out the bath. He's thrown out the very structures that keep all this together. I wonder, can you say a bit about that, about the overall structures that America helps to keep together, has played a big role in bringing about?
Yes.
And what maybe, because it's fine saying, okay, well, let's wipe the board and start again. But when you're wiping the board that is the bath, that is maintaining the structure, I think that creates other problems.
Yes. No, I mean, it is a very dangerous world, particularly in European context. We've been over-reliant on the US completely after the Second World War in every sense. I mean, particularly in terms of defense. I mean, US has provided defense for Europe during the Cold War and after the Cold War, so we didn't have to have big armies and all of that. Suddenly, when Russia occupied, these substantial parts of Ukraine, people say, oh, we need to defend ourselves. So that's a different story. What do you do in that context? But Europe could to afford to be very progressive and focused on other issues because it was protected. And now we find ourselves in a very different situation. I mean, in a sense, it's a small continent. It's in a global world which is very hostile and heavily armed, and you have kind of autocratic rulers, so many places, particularly in big countries, China and Russia, and I mean, to some extent, US as well. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen there as well. So yes, I mean, it is. I think that there is that problem of a system that existed for a long time after the Second War is collapsing. Definitely, there is. So Trump has speeded up this process. I mean, we can say the elements of that were there. Iraq War was also very early on clear. There was tension here from how European Union sees the world and how US sees the world. And people who have analyzed American foreign policy, they would argue, regardless whether Republicans or Democrats were in power, you have this quite, kind of informal empire mentality and strategy in how you approach the world. And I always remember, I mean, many years ago when I was looking at these debates in the US, there was always that sense, it's very different kind of debate than you have in Europe. It's this debate, a kind of imperial debate that we, how we see ourselves, what we can do with this world, which we don't have in Europe. We have our own, ambitions and things like that. So that has become much more. I mean, with Trump, you have this open shift towards imperial discourse, which is not hidden anymore. So before, empires had some sort of justification, whether it's religious, whether it's civilizational, civilizing mission, humanitarian, that's the Tony Blair, kind of George Bush idea. We need to impose for humanitarian reasons. With Trump, there is nothing really. We need it. We need Greenland. We need. I'll do what I like. I'll send a bomb whoever I want. So in that sense, yeah, you're right. It's not about everything's been thrown away and a new system hasn't emerged. So we'll see what happens after Trump. In which direction this can go, because obviously we had under Biden. Attempt to, essentially preserve a status quo, which doesn't work. An American electorate will not respond to that. You cannot have a status quo because it's awful. It doesn't work in US. It's globally collapsing anyway, and there has to be something different.
Any suggestions on what should be different?
No, but I mean, it would have to be much more egalitarian social order. I mean, but that doesn't happen with some nice pronouncements and ideas. It has to have a proper social movements. Or you end up with, people like, Schneidel, who have analyzed, when you have more equality, you have it after the wars, major wars. So wars have often been mechanisms for bringing more equality unintentionally, and both First World War and Second World War had generated an unintentionally welfare state. I mean, if you look at who invented welfare state? Prussia. I mean, Prussia invented welfare state because it was highly militarized and had to give something back to citizens. So, widows' pensions, veteran pensions were the first introduced because it was a small state. It had to have everybody mobilized, and because it was not democracy, and it also crushed trade unions, so it had to provide something. So, the seeds of welfare state start with Prussia, then with U.S. Interestingly, after the American Civil War, and then it stopped largely, and then Europe after the Second World War was a beacon of welfare states, and that's again legacy of the Second World War. People were willing to sacrifice themselves. Therefore, we need to provide health and everything else. And NHS is a product of Second World War. I mean, that's so again, nothing of this was intentional. It was governments were forced, and the only way that you can see social change through social movements. So somebody has to organize themselves and force people to do that. If left doesn't do it, right will do it. So
what's I've been saying that the argument if what do they say in America, if the left doesn't man the borders, then the fascists will.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's something going on like that now with the protests here. You mentioned that the real issues are kind of opaque. The real causes of people's hardships are kind of opaque. So they reach for this simplistic idea of nationalism, us, them. Okay, it's their fault. We can see clearly how they look different than us, they act different than us. It must be their fault. And I feel like that, in the same sense that if the left don't man the borders, the fascists will. If the sensible people don't come up with a coherent story that people can latch onto, a coherent vision of nationalism, that the fascists will, and that these shallow fascistic really ideas will take over and become the mainstream. I feel like there's even the Overton window has shifted a bit towards that already in mainstream media and stuff. What do you think could be the basis of a story that can come against that, a healthy nationalism that can push against that and organize in an egalitarian way?
No, I mean, I think UK is a good example of what's happening now, because obviously they pushed for this very right-wing policy of Brexit, which has proved, a complete disaster, and everybody knew it will be disaster. So now you have, how politics, the mainstream parties are losing support, and you have kind of two responses. You have more of the Brexit, more of the far-right stuff, and you have, we don't want any of this. This is a Green Party, which has managed to articulate this message, because the Labour couldn't. I mean, Labour has been very centrist, or even right-wing on most issues. So you need other movements, and there is a space for them. And I think the Green Party is doing that in the UK. Maybe also left-wing nationalists like Plaid Cymru and Scottish nationalists have managed. I mean, they've taken over power, because they're not happy with where this is headed. And I think in Ireland, it's a different system. It politically has been much more stable, for long periods of time. People have been always voting for Fine Gael. So I think it'd be interesting to what happens again with Sinn Féin, if Sinn Féin recognizes its role as a left-wing movement to attract, because that has managed to do that with the presidential elections. It has managed, and I think Catherine Connolly is a good representative of that vision, which is left-wing but nationalist. She's very nationalist. She's not. I mean, she's an Irish speaker. She's kind of, but her nationalism is very left-wing. It's very inclusive. It's, it's not, it's pro many good things. And I think that can be articulated, especially in Ireland. That can be easier articulated in many other places. You go back to this kind of legacy of left-wing nationalism. So less church, less or maybe some of the old traditions, but more of the kind of that emphasis on equality. We are all citizens. We are all part of this project. The republic, what this republic stands for, what can achieve, and I think it's interesting because a Fine Gael rhetoric has always focused on economic success. We are the Celtic tiger, blah blah blah. But that economic success was built obviously on a very capitalist world, and it collapsed very clearly in 2008. So you can have a rhetoric that doesn't have to focus on that. We don't have to be economically, because obviously in all these various lists, Ireland features very highly in terms of wealth, but that wealth is not equally distributed. It's a very unequal society. It's more equal than many other societies. It's much better to live here than the US, but still, there's so much room for more equality. Change in tax system. So having some sort of a left-wing coalition government is possible. I think that would change the narrative. That could bring, more, because it's very expensive place to live. It's very difficult for young people. You can have degrees and everything, but, there are no opportunities for, there are some opportunities, but not for opportunities to do what you wanted to do, or what you were promised that you can do, in a sense. So that's not good. And I think that can change. It's not so there is so much room for articulating left-wing version of nationalism, which is sensible, but it's not fascist. It can completely change the narrative, and it can deal with these issues, with these problems that current governments cannot do. It's like either here or in UK or many other places.
I talk to a lot of people who say they're nationalists, who say they're left wing, but then they talk from a right wing position, and then I said, "That's also you're right wing." No, I'm left wing. I'm like, okay, but what you're saying doesn't really match that. Is there questions people can ask themselves to say, okay, I need to decide whether am I right wing, am I left wing? What in the current context, with current arguments that are out there, is there simple questions people can say, okay, do I believe this or this? And that will tell me whether I'm...
So we have this idea since kind of Anthony Giddens being a kind of main ideologue of the Labour Party under Blair, he wrote these books Beyond Left and Right, advocating the idea that we can have a politics which kind of acknowledges significance of markets, but makes them more kind of socially aware, and so social justice and markets, that was the third way, to put it bluntly in a way. But that didn't work, obviously. We ended up with the first way, social justice disappeared and markets dominate and taken over. So I don't think that's the way forward. I think traditionally left and right have been very clear on most issues. Where do you stand in terms of, less taxation, right wing, more taxation, but sensible taxation, not taxation for the sake of taxation that you can see that goes, into education, into infrastructure, into, healthcare and childcare and things like that. So it's, the government can have that. Okay, people who earn more should be paying more taxes, but we will see the results. We promise these results, and so that's one issue. In terms of economy, it's very clear who is left, who is right.
Okay, so just to be clear, so people could say, okay, do I believe we should have more taxes and kind of redistribute the wealth through like education and all these social goods, or do I think we should have less taxes and I can be free to do what I want?
Yes,
more?
but that is one of the in terms of economy, that's the clear left and right. Less taxes, right wing. More taxes, left wing. But again, doesn't have to be more taxes, just more taxes. More taxes in a smart, way. They have to be results there. You have 4 years. What have you done? Nothing. Okay, it's not. So that's in terms of economy. But then, in terms of politics, where do you stand, in relation to, human rights internationally? In Ireland, I think most people were very pro-Palestine, and generally I think Irish foreign policy has been, it's not very different, it's like there is a common thread there, we don't support any wars, occupations, and generally pro-European, in more integration, but that's also where right would be, anti-European, pro-Israel. I mean, not pro-Israel as such, but pro this kind of right-wing version of Israel. It's like
ethno-nationalist kind
yeah,
of
ethno-nationalism. So that's the thing. Any ethno-nationalist project, you reject it, whoever it is. It's like But right-wing, that they don't. I mean, a lot of right-wing, far-right, particularly, they're all anti-Semitic, but they also love Israel. So that's the tension, because that's what they want. They want ethno-nationalist state everywhere. It's like
So that's a major one politically. If you
so
believe there's
left
an
for me,
ethnic purity.
left is not anti-Semitic, very much anti-Semitic in reality, but also hates the ethno-national states wherever they are. It's like
okay. So that's another question.
Yeah. And then in terms of culture, in a sense, what that means is it sort of imposing. It's like if you look at Hungary under Orban. I mean, that was also an attempt to create an ethno-national state, and a particular version of Hungarianness that had to be imposed. And that's changing now when he luckily lost power. I mean, what are the cultural policies of the right? I mean, again, you see Trump, fighting in any form of justice, any form of inclusion. That's a right-wing policy. Even removing, minorities, African Americans, and minorities from, presence in the military. I mean, it's just bizarre. So people who fought for that country and earned various, medals have been removed. They don't exist. I mean, it's just awful. They're women as well. I mean, it's just like so. I mean, it's very clear where left and right are. I mean, in terms of economy, politics, culture, you can just put them down and see what's going on.
I agree. It is clear, but again, I don't. It seems opaque to people, or people are confused as to which side they're actually on. I think a lot of
yes, because I think a contemporary political life is mixing things. I mean, so often you have this rhetoric. That sounds like left, but it's not in reality. So many far-right movements have embraced that, in a sense. Some of them might be against capitalism, not everybody, but some of them are, which would be a left-wing politics, but not, so you have that elements. We're mixing some things, but not, much of it is very clear where they stand. I mean, you can find that it's interesting. Some sociologists, like American sociologist Roger Brubaker, has analyzed the way how populist rhetoric has changed in Europe. So traditionally it used to be kind of very much, religious and supporting church, blah, blah, blah. Well, now, let's say in Dutch far-right parties, they're all invoking rationalism and enlightenment and women's rights against, Islam. That's the thing, because that's their target. So they embrace the kind of something that would traditionally be liberal or left, for their own purposes. So it's not, religion may not be a big thing anymore in Europe. So you can be secular and a far right.
It's all getting very mixed up.
Yes.
Again, I blame social media a lot for this, for confusing.
No, that's true, because obviously it's very difficult. I used to teach introduction to political ideologies many years ago, and that was most difficult for students. Liberalism, conservatism, socialism, political. They couldn't understand because it's very abstract, and I think most people don't understand where they are. I mean,
no, I agree. I agree, and I think when I was down at the fuel protest, I was talking to people, and they were very clear about the problems they were having. They were very clear about the reasons they were there, as in, I can't afford this, I can't afford that, the cost of living is too much, the cost of fuel, the cost of food, the cost of everything. But where they seem to get lost or a bit confused then is when somebody would say, okay, and what's the cause of that? Of those people over there. Them people that don't look like me, these cultures coming in here and they jump to that, you know what I mean? Because the reality is opaque. Reality is so messy. You know what I mean? That these simple stories really appeal to people. I guess I'm asking, how can we open people up, or open the conversation up to show that the messiness of reality and the messiness of the actual causes, and are some of these causes intentionally hidden? Do you think there's an intentional hiding of the real causes, the economic causes? Look at those folks over there.
Yes. No, I think there is. I mean, sometimes that's very blatant, sometimes it's less so, because I'm thinking now, just before the previous general elections here, if you remember, I mean, Sinn Féin was very high in the polls. And debate was all about housing, and then debate shifted towards immigration, which obviously benefited the government. So I don't know whether it was intentional or not, but you could see immediately government is being re-elected, and that issue wasn't among the top issues.
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously governments can play with this. They know that this is something they can. I mean, obviously you cannot control it. They can lose the narrative, and it can go too far right. But there are real problems, real concerns. Housing is a huge issue. It affects every, prices are, huge issue. All the stuff that you've encountered, the fuel prices, these are all real issues. It's not that they're not issues, but it's just about, where the causes are. I mean, and it was funny that this was all happening when Trump, who is representative of this far-right politics, is causing all of this directly. Yeah. So in a sense, rather than making this connection very clearly, you're blaming some, poor immigrant who has nothing to do with oil prices. I mean, at least that. Yes, but I mean, obviously, the capitalist economies are dependent on labor, so you have to have open borders to some extent. But then, this is because of boom and bust. And when the bust comes in, then suddenly there are no jobs. And then, we don't need these immigrants, blah, blah. So it doesn't work that way. Yeah. So either you have open economy or you have economy which is not very open, but it can combine some elements of it doesn't have to be capitalist economy, and that would probably mean less mobility of people. People be happy where they are, and that's the nature of capitalist economy. People move where the jobs are, and jobs can go anywhere. So that's a big problem, and it is not something that nation states can solve if they are part of the global system. It's not easy to deal with this. It's although I think, obviously I'm biased here being an immigrant myself, although I've been living here for 30 years. I think immigration generally benefits. I mean, if you look at the statistics, it is, not only in terms of economy, but many things. I mean, this society has benefited enormously from immigration. It has become an open society in many respects, integrated in the European networks, and obviously Irish citizens can live and work everywhere else. And it has become wealthy society in part because of that. I mean, it's just so blaming immigrants is probably not solution. Even if you got rid of immigrants, nothing would change. I mean, the U.S. is a good example. They got rid of a lot of immigrants. Its economy is much worse position now than it was before. So that's not a solution. I mean, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be sensible politics about immigration. That's fine. I mean, the problem here was that there were no sensible politics. People were waiting in these centers forever. I mean, it was not so that's changing, but we'll see what will come out of it. Yes.
I think a lot, and including myself, I had a problem with how maybe immigrants were being used as little economic units themselves. The Irish story of immigration has really changed over the past 30 years. I mean, historically, when you mentioned immigration in Ireland, it was like, who's coming home? You know what I mean? We had my mother tells stories about the Yanks used to come into the train station, and by the Yanks she meant the people who had gone over 10 years ago, and they'd come in and they'd buy everyone pints and foxes there at the bottom of the square, and they'd have the money coming home, But the truth is, Ireland was crap then, and economically it was crap. It was just, it didn't have much potential. But now, and it's hard for people to see this, that Ireland has changed so much. It's become economically a really good place to go and live and to try and earn a living. So of course, just like the Irish that left Ireland years ago to get a better living, now we have people coming here. But it's new. It's new to us. It's new to us in that sense. And I wonder, do we have to change our sense of what it is being Irish? I saw this young guy, and he was up speaking, and he was at one of these rallies, and he was reading, I think, the Irish Declaration of Independence. And at the start, he started off really timid and quiet, and then the crowd started cheering when he'd say one thing or another, and he started getting louder. And by the end of it, you'd swear he'd just written it himself, and the way he was so animated and speaking it. But people, and that Declaration of Independence is brought up a lot, and used by the kind of far right. But in that, it talks about our brothers in America, Ireland's the children of Ireland who have gone away and who are supporting Ireland, who are giving money to Ireland, it's like, how do people not see this, that they were our economic migrants,
Yes,
you know
yes,
what I mean?
that's
And now we're just playing a role in that larger society.
Yes, I think that, I mean, Ireland faces a similar problem that societies like Italy or Croatia have, you know, in a way, traditionally immigrant societies, you know, millions of people left, usually US or Latin America, and suddenly now you're an immigrant society, very, you know, culturally diverse, and it's not easy to deal with this, you know, for many people. I think it's also generational. I mean, people, you know, older people, middle-aged people who had very different experience may not deal with this so easily as younger people. I mean, especially very young generation who are used to now to cultural difference. That's not a big deal because they went to school with kids who are different, and you know, it's so I think that will take some time for people to adjust. But there is an issue, I think, generally with, I mean, there is about 20% of Irish population now is of immigrant origin. Mostly, you know, the largest group is English, it's interesting, and then Polish and all of that.
You didn't have to speak a different language.
Yeah, which is less visible in a way. It's, but it is interesting. They're not represented in Dáil, you know, in a sense. You don't see. I mean, Dáil is very, very Irish in a traditional sense. I mean, it is something to do with the electoral system, very localized, and you know, kind of. But that's also something that probably would have to be addressed, and it's not raised, you know, it's not, it's like, because that's also about being integrated, being fully integrated, you know, in a sense that you are part of society, you know, you are there. Hopefully we might change this in the West. Go away West, we'll see. But it's you know, it's an element of, you know, people being fully integrated, that they feel they are completely part of the society. And I think most immigrants feel, okay, you know, Ireland has been, I mean, it's not a stereotype. Ireland has been a welcoming society for many years. I mean, but you're right in a sense. I remember when my wife and I moved in '96, 30 years ago. It was a very different world, And we lived in Cork, and it was like there were very few foreigners. I mean, it's like very unusual in that way. Okay, we came to do a PhD, so it was different, but still. And then now when I see with my sons who are adults, how their world is very different. I mean, you know, it's like kind of they especially my younger son who was in college, you know, he's used to, you know, kind of cultural difference for him is completely normal. You know, that you have Irish Africans, you know, Irish, you know, of other origins is not an issue at all. I mean, it's not to say that there is no racism. There is racism. It's everywhere. But it's like society has changed completely, but it hasn't necessarily adjusted to these changes, you know, in a sense. And I think some of these debates, what is Irishness, and it's not that, you know, to go back to what we were talking initially, Irishness keeps changing constantly. You know, it's not, you know, something that was always there. You know, so we are now in the process of Irishness, which is different, and you know, it's something that I think will be different. I mean, in 20 years now, people will accept some things that they do not necessarily accept now. I mean, there was the Rose of Tralee recently, one in Dublin. It's a good example. And we had that. This is not unusual. And there was an example, I think maybe 10, 15 years ago in Italy. There was also a beauty pageant, and Miss Italy was a black woman, and then all from the right, she doesn't represent beauty of Italy, but now it's fine. I mean, now, you know, even the right wing accepts that. I mean, it's not, you know, it's like it in France, obviously that was always the issue, but then French football team wins the World Cup, and then even you know, the National Front is fine with that. The France National,
So maybe we need foreigners and immigrants represented in the Dáil and in Croke Park. Maybe that would help as well.
No, it would help. I think the GA as well. I mean, I think okay, GA is different, and it's some people are not used to, you know, kind of, because you would grow up with this, you know, with the sports. But I think in smaller communities, kids now play GA. I mean, from different backgrounds, and there will be kids who are good at it. And some of them are already there, but you know, they will be major players, and as they already are in rugby and soccer, and you know, so it's like, I think Irish sport has been very inclusive in that respect, easily so. I play basketball, old guy basketball, and it's, you know, basketball is also very inclusive, and you know, I see Basketball Ireland, you know, it's benefited enormously. I mean, excellent young generation of players, And I think across the sport, that hasn't been a big issue. GA is a little bit different, but I think that will come through. It's a matter of another generation.
I think it's a key linchpin, though, a key marker for
for
integration in Irish society. Though when you see people in Croke Park from different nations.
But rugby was not an issue. I mean, it's interesting because rugby is something where Ireland is very successful, and it's very diverse, and in both in kind of Protestant and Catholic traditions, but also now in immigrant traditions. And it's not, it's a big success story.
Yeah,
really,
that's true. That's true.
Yeah,
you mentioned Italy there. I was talking to someone in Italy recently, and I asked them about how nationalism is going over there. And he said, well, it comes up. He said it comes up in waves, but he said the history here in Italy, people recognize that kind of deviant nationalism when it appears, and it kind of gets put down quickly. We don't have that kind of historical reference for an Irish identity, for an Irish nationalist identity, where we can say, do you remember Mussolini or Paddy Mussolini?
Yes.
We don't have that here. So we have a kind of purity to our national identity that we see because our mythological heroes or heroes of the revolution. And we haven't seen the worst part of nationalism from the Irish context.
Yes.
Do you think that's a problem?
No, I mean, you can say, if you look at the legacy of the 1916 Rising, the rhetoric there was also always different. Sinn Féin had its own version of it, and the mainstream parties had their own version of it. I mean, and Labour had their own version. I mean, it's not because there are people there, Connolly, who were socialists. So in a sense, that's not something that Catholic Ireland was particularly comfortable with, and downplayed it. So that you can always invoke something. There are no far-right people apart from blue shirts that I can think of. In Irish history that you can say we can rely on this, and it's interesting. The far-right is not making reference to that, because that would be the logical link to me. So maybe a good thing in a sense that there is no legacy of some sort of a kind of Paddy Mussolini to invoke and say, okay, we'll do this again.
Yeah.
Because in Italy, obviously, you have a party in power now, which is a part of that legacy, but it has softened, at least internationally. Maybe in Italy less so, but it used to be far-right party. So that might be a good thing for Ireland. No, I mean, for me, what's most interesting about far-right here is that doesn't look to me like a domestic development. It looks more like important thing. I mean, in terms of framing it. I always remember that was maybe 10 years ago when these first far-right movements appeared, and I was looking at their posters in Dublin, and there was like, protect our troops. You can see this is completely imported from US, because in US...
Both of them.
Yes, in the US that has resonance. This is, you have no idea where you are. I mean, you don't know what will resonate here. So they learned. So this was 10 years ago. Now they don't do that. Now they are more strategic. They focus on specific issues. They ethnicize crime. They, you could see that they attack NGOs. They attack, stuff that can resonate. But they are still not there yet. And I think having no legacy of far-right might be a good thing.
Okay. I do worry about that ethnicizing of crime and the repetition of memes and short videos that kind of create people's reality. Then when they watch it too much, and it brings a lot of these issues up. The environment is a big concern of mine. Big concern for everybody, whether they think about it or not. But can we get a nationalism that kind of identifies with the rest of nature in some way? Are you aware of that anywhere in the world?
Yeah.
That kind of,
So you do have there are a few people who, that I know, some colleagues, Daniele Conversi, an Italian guy who works on nationalism and environment. And it is an interesting topic because you have that, again, some of it can be traced to, some nationalist movements, right-wing nationalist movements, where that kind of glorifying nature, German forests, so you have that a very strong stuff, and a return to the, in Britain as well, kind of the living in the countryside. The countryside is pure, it's white, it's different, and it's also class thing, aristocratic and hunting and all of that. And it's like, so you have the kind of right-wing version of environmentalism, and you have left-wing version of environmentalism, which is perhaps more urban and more, kind of all of that, and it's more global in a sense. You understand that it's very difficult to deal with something that affects the entire planet, and at the level of nation state, it's quite difficult. I mean, you can do this. I mean, we have lots of good pro-environmental policies here in a small country, but if this is not happening elsewhere, what can you do? If China has its own policies, and US now gave up on everything, so it's quite difficult, because this is something that you have to deal globally with. I mean, it's like okay, nation states, strong, big, powerful nation states can be a vehicle for this, and there were attempts to do this, from Rio a long time ago to many of these meetings, but nothing has been achieved, and that is a big problem, because this is something that definitely needs a global response, and politicians have to think short term. Whether
are national identities a barrier to this then?
Yes, national identity is a barrier, because it wouldn't be if there was some sort of common agreement, and then we all kind of pool and say, okay, we'll cut the gas emissions and something, and that was in the early 90s, there was the kind of plan. Let's go and cut, reach agreement, and we'll all do it together. But that collapsed, and obviously with Trump, that there's no way that this will come back. And we obviously have already missed so many targets, so it's not that this is coming. I mean, the disaster is coming, it's just a matter of who will be around.
If we think of nationalism, and I'm not sure this is how you think of it, we say humans identify themselves first hunter-gatherers, maybe their family, then maybe their larger group, their village, then we started becoming agrarian, and we started cities, and we maybe identified with larger groups of people, and then we maybe identified with our country and our nation, which is where we're at now. There seems to be an ever-increasing circle that's happening there, and that matches up with kind of our technological advances, or advances in being able to travel around the world and communicate with everybody around the world. Is there a possibility that this can grow into an identity that is global, or is there a necessary kind of exclusionary factor of those identities?
So we had these debates, they were particularly influential, let's say 15 years ago, about cosmopolitanism taking over, and people, especially with globalization, borders becoming less important, as they would say, geography becoming history. But that didn't happen, really. In a way, globalization has reinforced more of the kind of nation-state identification, and especially with migrations and all of that. And historically, if you look, obviously, you needed to have another to kind of to build. I mean, all the kind of state projects were built in relation to other state projects. So there was never really an attempt to create. Empires were the only kind of coercive attempts to colonize the globe. I mean, especially early so-called capstone empires, they saw themselves as the world. I mean, we are the world. Chinese empire, ancient Chinese emperor, we are the world. Everybody else is barbarian. Roman empire, we are the world. Everybody else is barbarian. And it's a matter of time that we will take them over. So that was the kind of original cosmopolitan idea. And if you look at the early, cosmopolitans, they were all elitists. They were all kind of coming at the top, and they were all kind of advocating that. So obviously, once we entered the world of nation states, you had reference to other nation states, and borders were, okay, you can fight wars over borders, but there was that acceptance. Nation states accept other nation states, in a sense. And the only way how we could transcend that is to, if there is another planet that you can refer to. That's the thing. And it's hard to envisage how that would happen, otherwise. I mean, you can, obviously, nation states, as I said, they are modern, so they at some point in the future, they will also be replaced by something else. I don't know what that could come. But it's quite difficult to envisage some sort of a global government.
Unless we get the aliens.
Yes, unless we get something different.
That might be the best thing about Musk, if he finds somebody on Mars.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, another option is also if the environmental crisis is so acute, there is no other way of survival. I mean, that you would have to do something together.
Because that becomes the unifying problem then.
Yes, that could become unifying problem, but could also be a way to bring conflict also. I mean, you could see people just closing their borders, and especially countries that are not more they're less affected by environmental changes. And
Do you think that's part of the kind of anxiety that's in the world now? Like you hear people talking about Irexit, like Brexit, and these we have to go back to just looking after ourselves. And when people talk about borders, they seem to imagine that we have a button for shutters that we can just close this down. It's like that's
it doesn't.
But if let's just say the worst came to the worst and we did go back to this world of just individual nation states, that we weren't attached to Europe, that we weren't attached to, how do you think Ireland would fare?
Yeah, it wouldn't fare well because obviously, there's so much interdependence here. I mean, Ireland always fares very highly as being the most globalized economy. So it is dependent on others. I mean, the economy here wouldn't do well without international companies, but also labor. I mean, there's a constant mobility, and all countries in EU have benefited economically, politically, culturally from integration. And I think that's, the problem is historically there were no examples of nation states that were completely sealed off. I mean, Albania was one during the Cold War, and it was the poorest country in Europe, and North Korea is another one in our world, which is like, I don't think that many people would like to live in that kind of world. No. So that could also lead to more authoritarianism, more poverty, more inequality, and it's also very difficult to envisage how you can do it. I mean, you would, in today's world, I don't think that's possible.
Yeah. I'm glad we agree on that. Okay, what role do you think academics and intellectuals play in the battle against what I'm calling a deviant form of nationalism?
Yeah, I think, it is important. A lot of academics don't engage with, the public. You do own your research, you publish your own journals and books, and you talk to your own bubble, academic bubble.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't think that's the way. If you want to, your research should be publicized more. I mean, obviously, mainstream media are not particularly interested in what we do unless it's something really, very sexy, and then suddenly they come to you, but tell us something very briefly, blah, blah, blah. But I try to, I communicate my research as much as I can, what I do, and sometimes that has some influence. Most of the time it doesn't, but, it's like, I think that's my role, in part as being academic, is to share this with other people. And it is a problem because now there is no appreciation of knowledge. There is that kind of, we live in this world with anybody's view is considered as, influencers are more influential than people who actually work on this for years and years, and it's a sad environment. But I don't know what else we can do. We can, I think knowledge matters, factual information matters, and people who work on something for most of their life obviously have something to share, which is different from somebody who has sound bites to share.
Yes, no, I totally agree. And this kind of anti-expert kind of thing that's going on is,
but it's dangerous.
Crazy.
It's also very dangerous. It's
It's very dangerous. How long have you been studying nationalism?
Yeah, I think 30 years. It's like.
Is this like a heyday for nationalism? Is it like, oh my God, suddenly?
Yeah. But it's like, for me, it was biographical in a part, because I grew up in what used to be Yugoslavia, and it collapsed, and it was shock to me, living there. What has happened? In a sense, and nationalism, particularly ethnic nationalism, became so, powerful. So since then I was, kind of, okay, my scope has expanded. It's become much more global and also transhistorical. but then you see similarities. I mean, I always joke with my childhood friends, you know, we had our local craziness, now this craziness has become global. So it's like, so nationalism now is more visible. So it's not that there is more nationalism now, it's just, it is more of the, you know, biting kind of nationalism.
Yes.
You know? So
it's not, I think you call it the banal nationalism.
Yes, nationalism is, you know, is being expanding over the last 200 years. And for me, what's interesting, I look at this through grounding. You know, I talk about organizational grounding, you know, ideological grounding, micro-interactional grounding. So I'm really looking at the way how it penetrates institutions, you know, in everyday life. And the biting kind is stronger because it's embedded, you know, and when it's barking, it is something to do with weaknesses. You know, it's insecurity. If you are secure in who you are, there's no need to shout. I mean, it's like, and that's the problem I think now with Irish nationalism, not just Irish, British, and everything else, because people have become more insecure, you know, in a sense, who they are, you know, what it represents, and it's and that's not unusual. I mean, you know, in major crisis, you see that it's not.
That's a great point. What are the warning signs that nationalism is becoming dangerous that people can look out for, not just in themselves, but in the mainstream? You know.
Yeah. No, but I think, you know, when people are, you know, first you need some sort of discourse of civility, and I think Ireland had that for many years. I mean, in a sense that, you know, there are limits, and I think Irish politicians have been fairly responsible wherever they come from. They try to avoid that. I mean, the dog whistle type of rhetoric, and you know, I remember there were instances when somebody would say something, and then others would say, no, we won't go that way. And so far that has worked. I mean, it probably will not work in the future. There'll be more of the dog whistling happening. And then when this dog whistling becomes mainstream, what we see, like in US or in UK or many other European countries, then it's difficult because then the whole rhetoric changes. So these people are, okay, they are more visible on social media, but they're not there in the mainstream media. They're not there in Dáil. They're not in the public sphere. I mean, the mainstream public sphere. So once that changes, then it's dangerous. Then you have that kind of complete, you know, different rhetoric. You know, it's and I think, you know, politicians can easily exploit that if they want to. I mean, some they do. I mean, we know with elections, some people do let it go just before the election. Some, you know, and then, you know, they don't do it anymore.
Yeah, but they apologize after they get elected.
Yeah, they apologize. But if it becomes, you know, more prevalent, then it's very difficult because then you enter a very different world, and it's all about, you know, this kind of gutter politics.
I have to say, when you're speaking there, I it matches kind of my experience at the fuel protest when I saw the people that were the loudest had the least to say. You know, and the people that were quiet weren't waving flags, and they weren't making loads of noise. They were saying no. They were sticking to the facts, sticking to the fuel protest. You know, and I think that was 90% of the people down there, to be honest. And now I didn't witness this, but I heard about it afterwards, that one of these the Facebook operators who stand up on trailers and give these speeches about who the bad people are, who don't look like them, but they came along and they were handing out hurls and bats and saying, oh, when the cops come, this is what we'll do. And they got ran out of the Galway protests. They were told, this is not what we're about. Do you know what I mean? And when the inevitable contact did happen between the guards and the protesters, I felt the guards used the right amount of force, and I felt the protesters resisted the correct amount too.
Yes.
I know there was barricades and there was stuff, but there was no punches, there was no beatings, there was no... and I thought, you know what? It's actually a successful protest. I really thought it was. And I know that didn't happen everywhere in the country, but... And if you just look at the clips on YouTube, you won't think that's what happened there.
Yes.
But I think the resistance was correct, and I think the approach by the guards was also correct.
No, that's my hope in a way. You know, there's a long tradition here. Okay, people were protesting, but again within the limits. You know what you can do, what you shouldn't be doing. And I think I'm all in favor for protests wherever they come, even, you know, from right wing, if it's you know, that's your democratic right, but there are limits. You cannot use violence, and the same applies to guards. I mean, you know, in a sense, what we know what they can do, and that has been not the case in many other countries. When, you know, in the US you see that constantly, you know, with ICE and all of that. You know, it's collapsing. There is no that civility, and once governments do that, that will come back to them as well. Even movements.
It licenses the population
yes,
to
that's
do that.
true. Yeah, violence spreads then, and that's so. I'm hopeful that Ireland has that tradition, and that it people can protest then, but it's the limits.
I think, and I have said that the right to protest is what makes is essential to a democracy. But I'm actually changing to, I think, actual protest is essential to democracy. Just having the right is no good if you don't have politically active
No, I think people should organize themselves. It's that's fine. I mean, that means that the people are acting. Democracy is not just about voting. I mean, it is so many other things. You have to be. Deliberate democracy is the best version of democracy. We discuss these things. We engage with each other. We attack each other. I mean, in a civil way. It's like we develop arguments. We organize ourselves. And that's.
It's a continuously ongoing conversation.
Yes, it is. It's not.
It doesn't just happen on voting day.
No, but that's a very reductive view of democracy. It's not.
What's the most uncomfortable truth about nationalism that both the political left and right avoid admitting?
I mean, the problem is nationalism is built. It has to be built on some myths and mythology. So it cannot be built on truth. And if you build something on truth, you lose social cohesion. I mean, because truth is cold. It's about 1 and 1 are 2. But we need to pick the best person for this job. But if you have to choose between the best person and your own child, it puts you in a very difficult position. Because obviously, and that's with nationalism. Nationalism has to build on something that we relate to, that we identify with, that is meaningful to us. Because we need something meaningful. And truth is not meaningful. Truth is good and important, and we build facts around it. But you need something that is more than truth. Something around So you need mythology. You need magic. I have an article on nationalism and magic. How magical elements are crucial for nationalism. It's very difficult to maintain nationalism, which is all about rational, because nobody will say, okay, according to all these criteria, our nation is crap. I mean, nobody will accept that. You'll say, okay, we are the smallest, but we are we have this special morality that nobody else, we have this special history or something, you have to have something special, something unique. And if you apply kind of scientific glasses to this, you say, no, you're 37th in this and 78th in this, and so that element of mythical, magical has to be there. So it's not, it's just that it cannot take over. If it completely takes over, then it's,
it has to stay connected to the reality.
Yes.
You're familiar with John Searle and his social ontology?
Yes.
A lot of what you say and talk about makes me sense that. Nationalism is part of our social reality. It's not part of the brute facts of the world. Being Irish is not the same as being a mountain. They're not in the same kind of version of reality. But
you need. It is a part of being of a meaning that you attach to. I mean, in the same way as you attach meaning to your friends and family. They matter to you because there are some emotional attachments, but. You wouldn't evaluate them. We've interacted 78 times. I found somebody else who will interact with me more. Therefore, it's like, you cannot apply these criteria. I mean, it's just like,
okay. So I'm glad we agree that nationalism is a form of mythology. It's a form of a useless fiction, which most of our social reality is.
Yes, it is. I mean, but I think all ideologies do that. I mean, you have that projection also of strong attachment, brotherhood, sisterhood. So these kinship metaphors, they matter in all ideologies. I mean, like socialism is also like we are all workers, and feminism, we are all universal sisterhood. But we are not actual sisters and brothers. I mean, it is a metaphor. It's
okay, the final question, because I know we're taking up your time and you've somewhere to go. Crazy thought, but if humanity was headed for some apocalyptic event and we had to leave a new story of what it is to be human for any survivors to start again, and you could add one sentence, what would that sentence be?
Oh, that's a huge question.
One sentence in 30 seconds.
No, but I think human beings have left so much. I mean, we are very creative beings, And I'm saying I think the creativity aspect is that leads everything else. I mean, we create we are creative in destruction and in creation.
Yes.
And I think that's something that defines us as human beings.
Okay, so be creative.
Creative, yeah.
There's something written on the wall down by the Huntsman in Galway. It's a bit of graffiti, and it says, "We have forgotten how to make," and it just has RE.
Okay.
And I think that leaves it open.
Whatever.
We have forgotten how to make reality.
Reality, yeah.
We've forgotten how to create it, because we create it together.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And that's what we do all the time. In culture is that, religion is that, ideologies are, everything we do. It's
Yeah.
I mean, it's make believe, but it's good.
But we need it.
We
need it. It's important.
Yeah.
It's not that it doesn't exist. It does exist, but it exists because we make it. Siniša, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thanks
It's been amazing, and you've been fantastic. And thank you, and hopefully we can talk again sometime.
Okay, great. Good luck with your podcast.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
On the down. I think this is a show of good faith. It's that might be what this is. Protesters. They're getting escorted out. There's a guard down onto them. Two trucks. Two oil tanker trucks. Yeah. I'm not sure what type of fuel is on.
Where's the guillotine?
Thank you.